For folks that are new to Ignite, Ignite is a movement of young women who are ready and eager to become the next generation of political leaders. And you're going to hear from some of our alums and current folks today that are really living this mission every single day. And so I just want to warn you, I'm also enrolling blackout territory here in the Bay Area due to the fires and the heat. And we all know, even though we are living in this very virtual world, that connections may sometimes still be a little bit unstable. So please bear with us today as we continue to navigate whatever this new normal is for us. As you can see, the event is also being recorded, so you can watch it at your leisure at another time. And, you know, we will all practice having grace. Oh, as my face just moved from one section to another, having grace as we shift into this world that we're currently living in. So as you all know, this year has been like no other in our current history. We are in the middle of a pandemic, an economic recession that we are just starting to really truly understand. We are living in a civil unrest in our nation's history as we are writing it. And in the last few weeks, really significant milestones. Today is obviously the centennial, and then Kamala Harris's big announcement with the VP presidential candidacy. And the DNC started yesterday, so lots of different pieces that are happening. So thank you so much for spending your afternoon or early evening with us to dig deep into these conversations. So in the midst of all of this, time and time again, we continue to see our young women really step up and really have deep conviction and have really creative solutions to all of the different issues that we continue to face. And so this is part 2 of 3 within our summer series to really highlight young women's perspectives as we continue to create opportunities that exist within positive change, and as we continue to invest in young women's political and civic leadership. I think some of you were here and joined us a couple weeks back when we kicked off the series with a conversation with our president and founder, Ann Moses and Jeneisha Sessi, around Gen Z and voting and everything you, me, all of us can do to turn out the Gen Z vote in this election. And so today we're going to have 2 super phenomenal conversations that I'm so excited to have. The first one is going to be with Trailblazers, Miss Christina Haswood, who just won her primary, and Congresswoman Sharice Davids, who won many different parts of her elections to get to where she is today. 2 Native Americans that are really, really leading the path. And so I'm super excited about that. Part 2 of our session today is going to turn the tables to 2 of our alums, Chalott, Barron, and Jeneisha Harris, who are really at the front lines of our civil rights movement right now in this country and are writing that history. Please drop in your questions in the chat box if you haven't found that. It's at the bottom right corner of your screen, and we will take questions in this particular conversation, and then also questions in the second part. So without further ado, I'm welcoming Christina Haswood and Congresswoman Sharice Davids to the conversation. So ladies, we have had quite a journey. I spent some time with both of you last year in June in DC, where the Congresswoman addressed Christina as a participant within our programming. And boy, what a world we have been since then. It's August 18th, obviously the big centennial day. I'd love to just kind of kick off. Tell me a little bit about the moments in each of your journeys that have gotten you here today. Start off with big questions because we don't take anything light here at Ignite. Christina?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. Again, my name is Christina Haswood. I'm a candidate for the Kansas House of Representatives in District 10. And just, you know, celebrating today is also another reminder of being Native American. We just got granted citizenship in 1924. So our right to vote didn't come 100 years ago. It came not quite, but almost pretty much 100 years ago, just to recognize that, you know, all of us women of color and our, you know, our ancestors had to fight to get here today. But some moments in my life that really propelled me forward today. In my career journey, I've been in the health policy field, Native American, American Indian policy, and I was always frustrated going into meeting a representative, and they I had to give a whole Native American history lessons. And when you go to the House, on the Hill, you only get 30 minutes with a legislative assistant, and 15 minutes of that is giving them a 101 Native American history lesson. And I just got frustrated with the process, and I never really saw myself being the lawmaker until I saw, Representative Davids and Representative Holland get into these positions. And I always thought a Native American from Kansas, I didn't really believe that we would be successful until, Congresswoman Davids did it. And then when I got into more of the local state legislatures, we have Representative Punkawee Victors here in Kansas, and she was working on a missing murdered Indigenous women's bill. And she invited me over to watch her press release the bill. And that was just goes to show how much work still needs to be done here in Kansas. And I was just ready to step up. And when the opportunity arose, I always said if my community needed me, then I would step up, and that's exactly what I've done.
Perfect. Thank you, Christina. And I think that, the big piece that you're highlighting for us is that it's a centennial for some, but not a centennial for all. And so I think that there are really big benchmarks that we are meeting as an entire country, and then clearly quite a long way for us to still continue to keep pushing in different ways. Congresswoman Davids, can you talk to us a little bit about key moments in your journey?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, I'm really excited that we're getting the chance to do this. Of course, I think all of us would love to see each other in person, but I am glad that we're still able to connect, even though we're in the middle of this public health crisis. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Certainly, I agree with so much of what Christina already shared. And in terms of kind of the bigger picture, but then when you think about the individual experience, I've always felt like I had really a pretty ordinary experience. And when I say that, I mean things like going to community college. It took me 4 years to get an associate's degree. It took me 4 more years to get my bachelor's degree. I'm a first-generation college student. I was raised by a single mom. I think that a lot of these things are just actually like very common, or at least not uncommon experiences. It's not uncommon to be raised by a single parent, and but the thing that is uncommon is seeing it in our the highest levels of government, and even a lot of times in our state legislatures or other decision-making positions. And so, I do think about those kinds of things, and my hope is that we'll see more of a shift to having some of these lived experiences in these decision-making experiences being better represented. And then the other thing that I would say, like related to kind of the topic of the day, which is women being empowered, and of course women of color, and I appreciate having 2 Native folks soon to be elected and then currently elected. I think that it's interesting because so often I feel like, and I don't know, Christina, if this has happened to you or you've seen it, but certainly when I looked and saw that the person who was representing this district, my predecessor, I thought he wasn't doing a very good job. And the first thing I did was try to convince other people to run for the seat. The first thing I did was go out and say, oh, I don't think he's doing, I think we can flip that seat. Will you run? Will you run? Will you run? And I asked a bunch of other people. And then at some point I was like, wait a minute. I have federal experience. I'm a lawyer. I care about what's happening. Why am I trying to get other people to run? I still encourage other people to run for office, but I should also consider whether or not I can be part of addressing the problems that I'm seeing. And so that's a thing that I think, not everybody got the right to vote not all women got the right to vote when the 19th Amendment passed, but it was certainly a huge step. And I think those steps come from women saying for a long time, for generations and generations, you know what, actually, I'm gonna I'm going to go ahead and try to make sure that I'm part of making this better, because I have something to say and it needs to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think the really big piece there is that I really want to highlight for everybody. Two pieces that you talked about, Congresswoman, that Christina, you gave a couple examples around, is we all have these very like ordinary experiences or that we don't think are extraordinary. And each of those different experiences that we have are actually what makes us completely qualified to run and to sit in the seats that we sit in. I'm a breast cancer survivor, 3.5 years out from diagnosis. And after the election in 2016, I was diagnosed right during inauguration week, because that's really fun. But during that week, I was really thinking about how do I continue to elevate this for young women, and joined a community board around healthcare policy. And it's an ordinary move with ordinary humans that sit around that table, but truly are making some really big decisions for their communities. And so I think, if more folks can do small, ordinary actions, we can all lead to some very extraordinary changes in our country. Talking about our country. It is so evident in our country, in our world right now, that there is a deep crossroads, and there is a part right now of like, where are you standing in history? What are you going to tell your grandchildren, when you have them? And there's a piece for me that I keep talking to our young women about, is we just can't take our feet off of the gas, not just one foot, but both feet off of the gas. Let me make that very transparent there. What do you both see as your roles as leaders in today's social justice movements?
My role, I've, going on TikTok, we've gotten a pretty young following, and it's really putting into perspective of a leadership role model role for me. Just last week, I was invited to a Zoom meeting with some Girl Scouts that were going into 6th grade. And, they were like, how'd you do it? Can I do it? I'm like, of course you can do it. You can join in with me when you're 18. And they're like, are you going to try to be president? And they had all these goals, and, just normalizing it, not making it a what if, but, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a nurse. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be, a state representative. I think my role right now is to amplify these voices. And there's a lot of social movements that I am not a good community to. And I think one of the biggest parts is we have to listen right now to the people from these communities that are being affected, and that will continue to, and take action how these people from the community want us to take action, not how we best think that it is to take an action, as well as just, supporting them in all ways that we can. And I think one of that is listening and educating ourselves, especially with a lot of racial, social injustice movements. Our basic education is not as transparent as we thought, and just continue to learn and have empathy, and to continue forward. And during this unprecedented time, we need that now more than ever, where we need to take care of each other and our neighbors, and for the future.
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, Can you also highlight? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Congresswoman Davids. I'll come back to Christina after.
I want to hear.
Okay. Christina, can you talk a little bit about too? Like I shared at the beginning, you came to us last year at Young Women Run. How did that propel you to, to take the leap?
Because last year, when I got invited to this event through my internship, and when I came to Ignite last year, I had no intentions of running for office. I wanted to.
No, thank
you.
Yeah,
you guys have a lot of great events where people have declared they want to run, and they want to run in 2030, 2040. And I was just like, I don't know yet, but you guys will do it. But I knew at that time, I was interested in politics. I want to run. I think I want to be in Congress one day, but I didn't think, I'm 26. I didn't think it was going to happen next summer. And it was just really empowering just to see a young woman of color, particularly for me, have this ambition and goal and say, I'm going to get out there and do it. I'm going to say it out loud. I'm going to scream it, and I'm going to come in every day at 8 a.m. and I'm going to stay until 9 p.m. And it was just so empowering. And I left that conference feeling like I could do it if the opportunity arose. And that changed within my essays and my academic career when I said, oh, maybe I want to run for office one day. It was like, I will. I don't know when, but if the community wants me to, and that's kind of what happened in my race. I got asked by community leaders to run. I was like, okay. And then it was just the whole imposter syndrome of being young. I just graduated grad school, of feeling qualified. But yeah, like Congressman Davis said, you are qualified. And when I shared my story to people, like my childhood story, being Native American, I thought that wasn't unique at all. This is it. You know, my story isn't as unique as other people's, but I guess to others that haven't been exposed to, you know, how our upbringings were, find it unique, and we need that change now.
Thank you.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about what Christina, what you were just saying is the idea of the default. What is the default that people go to when they're thinking about an elected official or a leader? And for right now, the kinds of experiences that we've had, that we're talking about, to a lot of folks, when they think of the default for an elected official, it doesn't fit into that. And so I think one of the things, you know, I always like to highlight that we've begun the resetting of expectations of who we elect, who runs for office, who we elect, how we support those folks. And I think that going forward, so going back to the kind of original question here, you know, what is our role going forward? What is our role as it relates to all of the change that we're seeing and change that we know needs to happen? And as somebody who's an elected official, it's interesting because I'm a huge proponent of listening, and Christina said so many of the things that I agree with. We are in positions where we're making decisions that impact every single person. And how much of those stories have we heard? How much of the ideas have we heard? Because, you know, the best ideas are not going to come from the United States Congress. They're going to come from the people who are living and breathing the experiences that are either working or not working. And so we have to be able to take all of that in, listen, and apply good policy and legislation. So one of the things that I think about it going forward is just how do we make sure that we're opening the door for other people, and how do we make sure that when we walk into a room as decision makers, if you're in a decision making position, this isn't just legislating, this is being a leader. If you're in that decision making position, you have the opportunity to look around the room and say, okay, who's not here? Who haven't we heard from? Whose story has not been shared yet? And I think that that's one of the places where having people who have a whole range of experiences can really impact the voices that are then heard, you know, going forward.
Amazing. Thank you. We're going to take a couple questions if you want to pop them into the chat box now. I wanted to just kind of highlight a couple other pieces that you both shared here. You both really talked about how do we develop and create opportunities for others to really be able to amplify their voices. And I think that that's a really big piece that we are taking on at Ignite, and really thinking about how do we hone in on the focus of young women at the table, and really flipping and shifting what power dynamics look like at the local level and then all the way up. And how do we impact that in every single space? The other piece that I really wanted to highlight too is there's a component about our country right now that you talked about, Congresswoman Davids, that there is no looking back. We are at a moment where we hit reset on expectations on the new world order, and it is our deepest opportunity, but also our deepest responsibility to take that on and to not look back and to be able to really shift the narrative. And I'm really looking to all of us, but particularly to our Gen Zers, because this is your turn. This is your part of the movement that you truly get to carry through, and really think about how do we continue to shift the momentum and carry it, because I'm not taking my feet off the gas, and I really hope that neither of you are as well. I don't see any questions yet, so I'm curious for the two of you, do you have any questions for each other?
One of the things, I guess, Christina, it'd be really great to hear just what was it like? I mean, I guess it's interesting, actually. You know, sometimes I'm sure people ask you this question, what's it like to run as a woman or something? And it's kind of like I only know how to exist in this world as the person I am. But I was wondering, like, what did it feel like to run, like, literally your first experience running for office was during a global pandemic, where so much of what, you know, like what my campaign looked like the first time was like tons of people showing up to help phone bank and knock on doors and put our yard signs together. And like, it just felt like a very like community centric type of thing. And, you know, I mean, I have a sense of like, oh, here's how things are different and that sort of thing. But I guess I'm curious if you could talk about what that, like, what was that like going through that experience during a global pandemic?
That is a really good question. And full transparency, I haven't worked on many campaigns. My only campaign experience was actually being one of your field fellows for my winter break for about 5 weeks, and then school picked back up, and I was like, sorry, I can't do this anymore. And that was pretty much my campaign experience. So when I first saw, you know, what we were getting into, I was like, social media has to be it. And I, of course, asked around to other leaders, and they were like, oh, I go door knocking. And the Kansas Democrats strongly encourage no door knocking because we want to be respectful of the voters with COVID-19. And I was just like, I want to, you know, leave this campaign with exhausting all options. And that's when we went from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter and even to TikTok. And then one of the biggest things I think that was successful in my campaign is my volunteers. So we had over about 50 volunteers who did phone banking for me. And we got some from TikTok too. So not were they only from Kansas, but they were from across the country. And then we, even from TikTok, we got grassroots donations of like $5 here. And that was a difference too with my other opponents, that I had most of the donations, grassroots donations from my own district. I think just building this community and building a movement was something that we were hoping we would do. And then we finally got a volunteer. He runs my TikTok and he has more of the TikTok ideas. Then we finally got to hire on a field organizer, and she got to manage more of the volunteers, and we really had a system going. I think it was great. I've heard that this pandemic is great for introverts to campaign because you don't have to go door knocking, but you got to make a lot of phone calls. How was your campaign experience with that? Are you guys doing anything new? Are you going to get on TikTok too?
I know that a number of people have asked me about TikTok, mostly because of my dance moves, but we haven't.
They are amazing.
We haven't gotten on there yet, but we are doing a lot of virtual digital stuff, you know, just trying to have people coming together on, I feel like Zoom is turning into a verb, but, you know, the just various ways that people can come together virtually to make sure that we're, you know, text banking and phone banking. And then Yeah, but it certainly is like I feel like one of the unexpected things that came from campaigning was just like getting to know so many people who are coming out and volunteering hours and hours. So, and then I think I'm gonna have to go.
Yes,
I know that.
I was like, Natalia's telling us that you have to run out. So
Yeah.
Congresswoman Davids and Christina, thank you so much for joining us for the beginning part of this conversation. We're so excited for the commitment you have to our democracy and to the work that we do at Ignite every single day. Take care.
Thank you so much.
So folks, we're just gonna do a quick speaker shift and then we will bring on Emma and Jeneisha. So just give us a quick second for that. And I know there were a couple questions that came on, so we will address those with our next round of speakers. Okay. And maybe as our next set of speakers get on, if anybody wants to drop what they thought about that conversation in the chat box, they're welcome to. Hi, Jeneisha. Get Emma on.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Oh, I should have worn my glasses. Hi, Emma.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay?
Your audio is perfect and your video is clear. All right, ladies. Well, folks, Emma and Jeneisha are both Ignite program folks. Emma was in our program at Irma Rangel many moons ago when we first launched programming in Texas. And Jeneisha has been serving as our, I was going to say Philly, but you are in Memphis, Tennessee, and our fellow in the Southeast. And so we're super excited to have both of you join the second part of the conversation. What did you all think about Congresswoman Davids and Christina's convo?
I think it was great to hear all things campaigning in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah, that was a great question, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we will dive right in. You know, it is no doubt that there are super mixed feelings on the announcement of Senator Kamala Harris as the vice presidential nominee. And both of you, your activism has really called on our elected leaders to continue to step up and show up for our communities. Can you talk a little bit about how you both hold elected leaders accountable?
Sure. I guess I will start off by saying that my strategy to holding elected officials accountable is not the most recommended. It's very unconventional, radical, and in a very rebel style. But normally I publicly critique them. I have a decent amount of following on social media, and I try to utilize that platform by, you know, calling people out that I feel should hold true to their promises. Many times I have these seats at the table where politicians will make these promises, whether that's during their campaigning or just in general at meetings, and they don't hold true to their promises in public. And so that's when the public critique comes into play for me. And so I just use my platform to do so. And I have a few ways and tips for other people to do so if I can share them. First, I would say study the elected official, their campaign, to know exactly their platform so that you can know exactly what you are holding them accountable for. That can look like showing up to town halls to hear about the concerns that they may be voicing, emailing concerns and reminders to those elected officials, calling their offices to express concerns on policies that they voted on or have introduced. And that's becoming what I like to call an unofficial community liaison to bridge the gap between elected officials and the community that they serve.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeneisha. I think those are some really big suggestions that you're sharing with us today, and really holding elected officials accountable from campaign day all the way to elected seat day, because eventually we're going to have to reelect them. And so there are timeframes to help hold them accountable. And I think the really big piece that you started out with was studying them and really understanding, like, who are they as a candidate, but then who do they become as an elected official? What are they voting yes on? What are they voting no on? And holding them true to each of those different pieces. Emma, how about you?
Yeah, so I think I've had involvement mostly in the immigration rights movement, and a lot of the people in the movement are disenfranchised, right? We don't have the ability to choose our elected officials. And so the way that we go about holding them accountable is by continuing to ask them the hard questions and not accepting, platitudes and kind of like a pat on the back. I think very recently, you all may have heard where a very prominent dreamer asked a leading presidential candidate, right, what he was going to do about immigration. And the response was just kind of like a shrug, kind of like, oh, well, if you don't like me, then go vote for the other candidate. And that's kind of the tension that we're trying to activate in our elected officials, because we want them to really think about what they're saying and what they're promising. As someone that's been in the immigration movement now for almost 10 years, it feels kind of like we're being strung along if there's no action tied to that commitment or to that promise. And so we continue to ask the hard questions, knowing that that's how we're going to push a candidate towards, an issue that we care about. And that's really how we've gotten to this point where dreamers are more visible in the public. They enjoy the benefits that they do. That's because activism and immigrant youth have been out there asking the candidates the hard questions.
And you both have been doing this work for, you just said, Emma, for 10 years, and clearly you are young. And so we're all young, right? And so I think that there's this big piece about doing this work and like being called to this particular service. What do you both see as some of the core intergenerational differences on the way that folks are just organizing these days?
Yeah, if I may. So when I first got started, I was in high school, and I kind of was pushed to this kind of activism because I, for whatever reason, had some like will and want to prove, to others that I was worthy of being in this country, that I was worthy of having a life just like everyone else. And since those years, I've seen a shift in sort of the respectability politics that the movement has kind of tried to shy away from, just because, that activism served us well 5-10 years ago when we first received DACA. And now our activism is focusing on, and of course, in light of the pandemic, essential workers, right? Our families, our neighbors, our community members who may not be the stereotypical dreamer that you see in the media, but are nonetheless deserving of dignity and humanity in this country. And so there's been a shift away from that respectability politics that kind of defined the movement very early on, and I think it's still just struggling to let go of. And then there's also more room now for people to realize that our liberation is tied to one another. And so in the social justice movement that we had this summer, right, it was incumbent upon the immigration rights movement to say it is our duty to say that Black Lives Matter, because our organizing tactics were founded in, the tactics of the Black Panthers or abolitionism. And so recognizing that there was room there for intersectionality and the need for us to step in and provide support however we could.
Thank you, Emma.
So beautifully said. I definitely vote. There is definitely more space for more people to be included in this movement. And also the aspect of respectability politics. I feel like we're doing away with the entire concept, which is great. But I also want to give a little pushback, if I can, on the question. I know the question was initially the differences, but I want to talk a little bit about the
similarities. Tell me more, my friend.
Yeah, I have a mentor, Mr. Kwame Lillard, that I talk about often. He was a part of the civil rights movement in 1960 in Nashville, Tennessee, where he was a student at Tennessee State University. And there he literally was a part of the movement that integrated the lunch counters. So I am literally experiencing the fruits of their labor. And many of the freedoms that we enjoy were because of people like Mr. Kwame, who was arrested multiple times, was spit in the face, was pied in the face, demonstrating civil disobedience. And so some of the similarities that we talk about, he is 81 years old and I'm 24. So there's an almost 60-year gap between my mentor and I. And we always talk about the similarities of practicing civil disobedience. I know myself, I've been arrested twice for practicing civil disobedience at the Tennessee State Capitol around my activism. That also looks like organizing specifically young people. Back in the 60s, they put so much emphasis on young people and students because that's where the change was. And I feel like nowadays we are doing the same thing here in 2020. You see many young people on the front lines, many young people who are running for office, who are winning these offices. And so I just wanted to touch base a little bit on those similarities. But you spoke about the differences very well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jeneisha, because I think that that's very true. And thinking about how we've shifted pieces, and obviously it's so hard to compare pandemic world versus pre-pandemic world in that regard. But I think the pieces that you're really tying on goes back to what Emma talked about with our liberation is truly tied to each other. And I think that's the really core piece about movement building, is that is the core that has been really shifting us forward. I am going to take this question from Ms. Kathleen Burke that says, what is your approach in persuading young people to vote when they say that their vote doesn't truly matter?
Yes. Can I take this question? Okay.
You can both take it. You can start.
Yes. I've had my thoughts on all things voting coming from a disenfranchised background and an impoverished background where many of my fellow comrades and people and community leaders feel like our votes just don't matter. But I've come to realize that unfortunately all oppressed people, our oppression is rooted in all things policy. So we absolutely have to be involved in the political process, or people who are not involved in our communities will be making decisions about us without us. And so it's imperative that we are involved in the political process, and that includes voting. I do want to provide a few resources if I can. Lately, we've been talking about how do we vote in a pandemic and what does that look like? So I've been talking with friends. I'm actually going to have a social distancing make your vote plan party so that, you know, my friends, my community leaders, and just people in the community can have a plan to vote because this election is so crucial. And even furthermore, after this election, number one, that's make a voting plan. So get with friends. You can do a social distancing voting party. If you're just totally freaked out about the virus, you can do so by yourself. Make a plan and figure out how you're going to vote in this election and beyond. Number two, research your state laws and restrictions given this global pandemic. Each state looks different. And number three, just do it. I have a link that I want to share. It's really just as simple, just do it. I have a link that I want to share that talks about the technicalities of voting in each specific state, and it gives you a step-by-step guideline. I'm going to try to plug that into the chat box.
Yeah. And Jeneisha, I think a lot of your resources are going to be really complementary to the Ignite the Vote campaign with the state-specific voting guides. I think, you know, all of our college students across the country are doing these within the campaign. My favorite activity leading up to Election Day is the Know Your Ballot parties, which is exactly what you just described in terms of getting with your community. And for folks on the call, we are doing this across all of our college programming across the country, where they're literally going to dissect their ballot and best understand, you know, here in California, for some of us, the ballot last election was like 90, not the primary, but the last gen was like 90 pages. So really understanding what that is. So for folks who haven't tuned into our Ignite the Vote campaign, really honing in on that particular piece with the state-specific guides and leading into some of what Jeneisha just shared. Emma, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, definitely. So whenever I'm approached about the question of voting, it's very easy for me to just say, well, think of me, right? I can't vote. I jokingly tell people, this is taxation without representation. I'm, paying my bills, paying my taxes. But along that route, I tell people, someone wouldn't want to be trying to disenfranchise you if your vote didn't matter. Like, why is someone trying to defund the postal service? Like, if your vote doesn't matter, right? Like, to what extent are people taking action against your right to vote as a citizen of this country that, you know, you in your head, you're thinking that it shouldn't matter. So I always lead with that, right? Think about why someone is attacking your right to vote, and then think about not just the people who are not citizens, but former felons who don't have the right to vote, formerly incarcerated folks, right, don't have the right to vote. And I ask people, when even that is not enough, I ask them, think about how you got. So if we're hanging out in a coffee shop or if we're at someone's house, obviously pre-pandemic, right? I ask them, how did you get here? How are you breathing the air that you're breathing in your house? Someone had to decide that the air that you're breathing was safe. Someone had to decide that the car you were driving was safe, or that the sidewalk that you walked on, you know, deserved repair or not. Literally every aspect of someone's life is decided by the policies, either locally or federally, that are in place. And I think we go about our day sometimes just, you know, doing our own thing, that we don't stop to think that basically 99% of our day is decided by those policies.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are not using that to your advantage to make sure that your voice is heard, then someone else is, right? Your landlord is. The owner of the grocery store that you go to is jacking up the prices somehow, or just like all the things that are affecting you in your community. If you're not trying to have your piece of that pie, then someone else is going to keep all of it. And I like pie, so I'm going to take advantage of it, you know?
Yeah, Emma, I think what you just described, for folks that are new to our high school programming, Emma just firmly described the know the root cause activity lesson plan that we do, but it's literally getting to what the roots are, which are all related to policy. And so what we're voting on is beyond the human and beyond the candidate. It's really about what are the policies are we going to enact in our country? And going back to Jeneisha, it's like, why are things not happening in the way that they are? And so really addressing that particular piece. And we at Ignite are really trying to work so hard to make voting easy, with also without going to say that there's obviously some very structural areas of growth that need to happen in our country. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, in our opinion at Ignite, is to elect these young women to fully serve in those positions so we can flip each and every one of those policies in my lifetime, and hopefully in all of our lifetimes that are on this call. The DNC started yesterday, ladies. The DNC started yesterday. I don't know if you tuned into any or all parts of it, but I'm going back to Kathleen's question before. I'm kind of curious from both of you, like, how do you think the you know, these large parties of our country can resonate to Gen Z voters and to young voters?
I think, unfortunately, in the circles that I am on virtually currently, we haven't been able to meet in person and organize in person. There is still a feeling of disregard. There's still, I think, a lot of hurt. And I think that goes back to seeing elections as choosing candidates versus choosing the policies we want, right? And there's still, I think, a lot of heartbreak over the fact that someone's perfect candidate didn't win. And so I think now our task is to really tell people that the moment for you know, crying and having our heart broken has passed, because we're now at a moment where we're called upon to do what's best for the entire country and by extension the world, right? And so fighting back against some of that like apathy that has developed towards the DNC specifically from a lot of the circles that I'm in, it's going to be a challenge.
I agree. I definitely believe it's absolutely going to be a challenge, because people have this perfect candidate in their head that they want to win, and when they don't want to vote for the next best person. Sorry, that was a tongue twister. So I definitely echo everything you just said.
Well, ladies, I think we have to wrap up our conversation shortly. And so I think just to close out, I'm kind of curious for both of you of how do we guide this conversation for our young folks in terms of movement building and power to the polls this November for our young people? What would you say to them?
I would emphasize what Alexis McCarthy just added in the chat box. Michelle Obama said that there is no perfect candidate. And honestly, I had to get over that myself. There is no perfect candidate. And I think emphasizing that will make more young people specifically go to the polls, because in my experience with my friends, with my peers, that's the number one concern. People don't want to vote because their favorite candidate is not going to be on the ballot. And I think that this election is way more important than that. So I think emphasizing that one piece is very important.
Thank you, Jeneisha.
You're welcome.
And kind of adding on to the conversations that I have with folks about how policy, kind of leads our lives. I always say that a lot of the times the most direct policies come from the local level, right? The COVID response is all tied to how our local counties are responding to the needs of every unique community. And like I'm in Dallas right now, and I'm thankful that we have a county judge that's listening to science, that's making sure that we are taking the appropriate responses. But I feel for the people who live in counties where they don't have a county judge or someone in authority who's making that decision. And so in addition to reminding people about, there is no perfect candidate, I tell them that there's someone in your own backyard who's going to be making a lot of decisions, whether it's relating to your school district or property taxes. Thinking beyond just yourself, I think, is a skill that we're having to tell people to practice, especially in the middle of a pandemic. How are the local decisions going to affect your parents, your grandparents, your family members who might not be as involved, who might not be as in tune to what's going on policy-wise, and really thinking about how easy it is for elected officials locally to be able to get away with those things if no one's holding them accountable.
Yes. Well, ladies, it was so amazing to spend part of my afternoon with the both of you having this conversation. I was super excited about it. I just want to highlight a couple pieces before we close our session together today. I think we just really need to go back to this piece with there is no perfect candidate. And that is going to stay true for us in so many different levels across each election and every single year as we all continue to build our election grit as we continue to process that. The other piece that I really want to highlight that Emma talked about was activating the tension. In movement building, at Ignite, you have to continue to fuel the fire is what we talk about, and really filling each other's cup. But the really big piece here is like, how do you continue to activate the tension amongst every single party that's involved, whether it's the young people, whether it's government, whether it's everybody in between. That needs to be a constant push within the work that we're doing as we continue to empower disenfranchised communities. And then I just want to close this particular conversation with our liberation is really truly tied to each other. This is not a one-person game. This is an hour game. And I think the closer we can get to that particular reality and practice, that Emma's work and Jeneisha's work is tied to Sarah's work, and Sarah's work is tied to Alexis, Cinda, everybody on this call and everybody around the globe, that we can continue to really make some very big shifts. And, to what the Congresswoman said earlier, to really press reset and not look back. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Jeneisha, so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you both have a beautiful rest of the day. Amy, I think we're going to get the last slide up, and then we will close out our time together. Okay. And so a couple of pieces. If you have not already supported Ignite financially, clearly there is no better time than now. Your money is going to go directly to our efforts to accelerate young women's political leadership and make sure that they're actively engaged in this election. And very much within our Ignite the Vote campaign. We have one more session in September. I believe it's September 2nd. And so we'd love for you to join us back for that if you're not already signed up, or introduce a friend within your community to join us. The 3 folks that we have speaking there will be 2 of our alums, also Samantha Perlman, who is serving as counselor at large for the Marlborough City Council in Massachusetts. Oh, this is, you guys are playing tricks on me with this slide. And then Jocelyn Yao, who is our policy manager, but also serving as a mayor pro tem in East Vale. And I think we'll have a couple other surprise speakers for that we will be sharing with you all soon. And so please check out our Ignite the Vote campaign. If you haven't already, texted 33777 to get involved in the campaign. I encourage you to do so now. So thank you so much. I know that everybody has competing priorities and a gazillion things on their agenda today. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And thank you for your commitment to Ignite and the continued political power of all of our young women across the country.